Good morning. There we go, yeah. As you can tell, we're going to do things just a little bit different today. We have with us a special guest. This is Dr. Mark Ziese.
Hey.
Everybody say hi, Mark. There we go, yeah. And Mark has been vocationally a professor of Old Testament stuff. And but he actually, Mark and I have known each other for 45 years now, which is weird because I'm only 44. We went to school together down at Ozark Christian College, and then kind of both graduated at the same time. And then when I was doing graduate work over at Cincinnati, he was doing graduate work at Cincinnati, first at Cincinnati College Bible Seminary, then what, Hebrew Union, is that right?
Hebrew Union. Mm-hmm.
Hebrew Union. And then he wound up teaching there, and then when I was there a number of years ago and working at the school, and he seems our paths crossed again, and then he left and went to another school, and then we saw each other in 2018 on a tour of Israel.
Israel, yeah.
And so the reason we brought him in
and you
today,
haven't changed a bit.
Not a bit.
In all of those years.
Yeah, I'm as weird as I ever was. The reason we brought him in, we began talking about an Israel trip, and Troy was asking about that. I said, well, the guy you need to talk to is Mark Ziese, because that's what he's doing. So we're also getting ready to do a series called, The Glory and the Power in Ordinary Places, and looking at some of the things, some of the sites around Israel, particularly in the Old Testament, where God's power shows up. But the place itself is very ordinary. So I thought, well, it'd be fun to have a conversation with him. But Mark, why don't you tell them, I gave a little bit of your story, but tell the folks some more about who you are and what you're doing and all that stuff.
Sure. Well, I went on an archaeological dig when I was in college, and I came home and I said, this is what I want to do for a living. The only problem is it's hard to be an archaeologist as a career. And I ended up going into the field of academics, and I taught. So I taught Old Testament for many years in the classroom, dug on the side in the week in the summers, and then towards the end of my real career, I ended up working in academic administration, became a dean of all things, and ran screaming away from that into retirement. Yeah.
So what are you doing now in this retirement age, sitting around watching TV?
Watching the grandkids mostly, which is like TV, only worse. I know. Watching the grandkids, and then we take college groups and church groups on these tours. So we continue to do our archaeology and history work, but with smaller groups in the lands of the Bible. Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Italy, those places.
Very cool.
Tanzania. Yeah. Safari, a little safari.
All right, yeah.
That's
all
for me.
All those biblical sites down in Tanzania.
That's for me. Come on. God created it all.
So we're going to talk a little bit about archaeology. Sounds like fun, didn't it? You all got up. I hope they'll talk about archaeology this morning. When I picture archaeology, the image that comes to my mind is Indiana Jones, silhouetted on that hill over the Well of Souls, or running from a boulder, coming crashing down. Have you ever run from a boulder?
All the time.
Yeah.
Every day. Snakes, Nazis, rolling boulders.
Yeah.
I have scars.
Turns out,
yeah,
it's a documentary. Did you know that? Indiana Jones is a documentary and stuff. What? I'm assuming that's not exactly how it is.
Not exactly. No. Although there was a time in the history of the discipline when it was more like that. Yeah. Back in the old days, it was, snag the stuff and run as fast as you can. Today, it's a little more measured and controlled.
So tell us a little bit about how archaeology functions, how it works.
Right. Well, the way it works in principle is as follows. Over the course of time, human remains, and I'm a historic archaeologist, not a prehistoric or anything else. I'm a historic archaeologist. We do historic archaeology, which means we're after humans, right? People. And human communities and settlements and sites tend to get buried over the course of time. And so the job of the archaeologist is to go into such places and, in a sense, strip away the layers in the reverse order in which they were laid down. From archaeology, is one of the few disciplines where you begin at the top of your field.
Bada boom. Yeah,
begin at the top of your
where's
field.
The drum kit
Yeah. And you work your way down. And so we strip these layers away, layer by layer, down till you get to sterile soil, bedrock. Yeah.
So how does biblical archaeology compare or contrast from regular archaeology, if it does at all?
Yeah, well, we dig with Bibles. That's the difference mostly. Or kind of like a metal detector, No, there's no difference really between biblical archaeology and archaeology. When we say biblical archaeology, what we are talking about is archaeology that's focused in a particular time and place, right? So we're talking about the lands of the Bible, mostly eastern into the Mediterranean, in the centuries leading up to and after the time of Christ. So what makes biblical archaeology biblical is really focus. But in terms of the science, it's the same. Yep.
So tell us about how it works. How does it function? First off, how do you know where to dig? Right? There's all sorts of places. Do you just say, let's try that patch
over there?
Yeah,
over there. Well, hopefully you see something, that starts the great chase, and we have wonderful tools that are at our disposal today that weren't at the disposal of the ancients or the previous generation of archaeologists. We have these remote sensing kinds of things, and we can look down on sites from satellites. And we have tools that we can drag across the surface of the ground that reveal, there's something down there. So hopefully we begin with those kinds of clues. And still, it's a bit of a chance game. You never really know what's down there until you get there. Yeah.
So, out of when you look at, let's say, Israel, when you look at Israel and you're like, well, let's go dig that spot.
Yeah.
What's there that draws you to that spot?
Well, hopefully there's memories that are latent in the community. And that is to say, the villagers who live nearby say, we used to bury our ancestors up there on that hill. So, you talk to people. And then you go up to the top of the hill and you look around and you see if there's stones and patterns, that are right there at the surface. Look around, little bits of pottery. Pottery is eternal. And broken shards are usually over the top of all of the archaeological sites that we deal with. So you pick up the pottery and you say, look at here, it's an Iron Age piece, or that's a Bronze Age piece. And that's the kind of clues that initiate the digging. All that happens before we dig.
All right. So let's talk about the digging. So
Yeah.
how does that work? So you found a spot.
Yep.
You're going to start. What do you do?
What do you do? American archaeologists working in the Middle East, what we do is we establish a grid. So we sort of, stretch strings, either literal or figurative, across the top of the entire hill, and then we excavate in little squares. This one, that one, the other one, because it's all sampling. And we, in a sense, drain the pool inside of that square, layer by layer by layer by layer, one at a time, capturing all of the data that we can from each layer. And hopefully, as we go down, the artifacts get older in time, if things aren't all disturbed and wonky. And, that's how it goes.
So who gets to keep the stuff?
Yeah.
Do you walked out with anything in your pockets?
Yeah.
Do you have the Ark of the Covenant in your basement?
In my garage. Yeah. I kill the neighbor's dogs with it from time to time. No.
We'll edit that out
Yeah,
later.
let's just keep going. So in today's world, in the old days, they would grab and run. Today's world, you get a permit from the government or from the territory where you're working, and everything that we find belongs to them. And so at the end of our season, they come in, they swoop in and say, thank you, we appreciate this very much. This will look nice in our museum. And we say, thank you, can we write about that in a journal or a magazine or an article? And they say, yeah, sure.
Okay.
So we have articles, we have words. They have the artifacts.
What,
Yeah.
This is a question we want to know, what's the most amazing thing you have ever found, or interesting thing maybe that you've ever found?
My wife.
Yes. That's not about her age, is it? No.
She's listening, I hope.
Okay.
I hope, yeah. The most interesting thing, every so often we find something fun. I've not found any Dead Sea Scrolls, still looking for chariot wheels and the Noah's Ark and all that, of course. But most of what we find is everyday material. So we find pots, and we find walls, and we find ovens, and we find tools, and we find the things of everyday life. Most of the archaeological sites that we excavate have been picked over. People will go through and, they grab stuff. So what we're really digging through is the garbage. We're pulling out what was left behind that nobody else thought was valuable enough to take. So finding something really spectacular doesn't happen very often. It does. One time we had a wall that fell over into a house, and it crushed a whole collection of pots. And so we had all these jars. Some of them were crushed. Some of them were intact. One of the jars we pulled out from the Iron Age actually had the guy's name written on it. Naumas. I still remember. Naumas. Jug. And whoever made it left their thumbprints on it. It was kind of cool. You pick it up and you say, gosh, this guy has hands just like me. Wow. It's kind of a touch. I'm touching somebody who's been dead now for 3,000 years. It's just kind of cool. But normally what we pick up is just the litter and, this stuff that they've left behind. Was
that the same site you mentioned earlier about in Jordan, where there was like an oven thing
there? Yeah, we found an oven there in Jordan, which was kind of cool. That was the same site. Good memory. That was the same site. It wasn't the same area, but in another area on that site, we found a kitchen and all of the tools and instruments and everything. And we found an oven in the corner. It was just, it had been crushed. It looked like a little beehive, And there were ashes on the inside, and there were chicken bones on the inside as well, which is interesting, because they didn't have chickens in Israel-Palestine until the Persian period, which begs the question, what did everything taste like before the Persian period? But anyway, we found the oven, and as we were trying to analyze it and put it together, one of the young boys who was helping us said, hey, my grandma has one of those. And so we followed him after the day's work back to the house, and he showed us how grandma was still using the same technology that was used in the, late Iron, early Persian period, 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, still using it today. Yeah, isn't that cool? And then later on, we discovered back in the text of Genesis where it talks about this deal that God cut with Abraham, how one of the signs that he dreams about in the book of Genesis is a smoking oven that passes through. And this smoking oven, it's the same word. So those same little ovens were used in Abraham's time in the Persian period and today, which reminds us there's a certain continuity of life in the land of the Bible. And it's fun when you stumble into that kind of thing.
Which I think that leads us into this, the big question. So archaeology exists, right? It's this thing. And then we're over here studying the Bible. How do they connect? How does archaeology help preachers and teachers? How does it help the folks in the chairs, the auditorium?
Put it all together. Well, that little oven story kind of helps with that. When you think about, I'm trying to understand what is this image that Abraham has about an oven, a smoking oven. And, well, suddenly we have one, Archaeology has demonstrated this particular aspect of ancient life. Probably the best way to approach an answer to that question is to go back to an Egyptologist who functioned last century, and he said that archaeology does three things for us as Bible scholars and as Bible students. Archaeology illuminates, archaeology illustrates, and archaeology confirms the Bible. And each of those categories is important, and each of those categories sneaks ever closer to, what we might call historical proof, although proof is hard to come by. But when we say archaeology illuminates, it casts a light, ovens. We know ovens, right? It casts a light on human activity. Sometimes it illustrates, and we have exact things that are described in the text that are described in the archaeological record, the destruction of a place. We find the burn layer. And then we also have confirmation. And the confirmation, of course, is what we love the most, but it's the hardest to come by. And when I say confirm, what I'm saying, what Kitchen was saying when he said illustration, illumination, confirmation, when he says confirm, what he's talking about is that we have confirmation of exact events or people. Like, for example, we know Cyrus was a king, right? We find his name on a tablet. Or we know that this particular site was destroyed at a certain time. Thebes in Egypt was destroyed by the Assyrians as described in the book of Nahum this year. And we go to that site and we find the destruction that dates to that year. It's like, wow, that's it, And so sometimes we have those confirmation moments, those really powerful things that prove or that lead us to the conclusion that archaeology is helping us to underline the Bible or prove the Bible.
Can you confirm this? I heard this years ago, that while we don't find everything in the Bible in archaeological record yet, right, that what we have found lines up with the scriptures. That we haven't found anything that's more or less, says, oh no, it's completely different than what we read.
That's out of alignment. And I'd say that's true. That archaeology does confirm, in the main, what we read in the Bible. It's not disproving it. What we don't have is total confirmation of every piece, and so there are things that are just unknown. We were talking last night a little bit about the Israelites coming out of Egypt and into the land of Canaan. We don't have any evidence of the Israelite wandering in Sinai. So does that mean it didn't happen? Is this a contradiction, or is it simply a gap in our knowledge? And I guess I would argue that what we have is a biblical text that is innocent until proven guilty. I like to call myself a friend of the Bible, as opposed to the other way around, which says that the Bible is false until we prove it true. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So we're talking about beginning points. Is it?
So starting with the assumption, a presumption that the Bible is true until we see otherwise.
Until we see otherwise.
And a lack of knowledge doesn't disprove it. It just doesn't confirm it yet.
It's a non-starter.
Okay.
And there's plenty of those. But there's also plenty of arrows that are all pointing the same direction. Okay. Yeah.
Let's ask the big question that we often hear about. So we see some things on the internet or from time to time that like chariot wheels, the Red Sea, or Noah's Ark. What?
Ark
illuminate that for us. What's going on there?
Well, let me just say straight up, don't believe everything you see on Facebook. I don't believe it. The chariot wheels, chariot wheels are bogus. They're all bogus. All the chariot wheels. We've not found any chariot wheels, ever. And no bit or piece of Noah's Ark has ever been found. And I don't expect anybody to find it. It is a living mountain that's glaciating and calving and chunking all the time. If there was anything up there, it was destroyed a long time ago. So there's no Noah's Ark that's ever been found. Does that prove that Noah didn't exist or that the story is a myth? No. It just proves there's no material remains. Yeah.
Do I remember that you climbed Ararat?
I did. But we weren't looking we were just playing. We were just fooling around. I had a guy ask me one time, he said, what would you like to do if he was someone who was willing to pay my ticket? He said, what would you like to do if you had a free ticket over there? I thought, I'd like to climb Mount Sinai or climb Mount Ararat. I was joking. And he said, done. Come on, let's go. And we did it. Wow. Yeah, it was a pretty good climb.
And you saw zebras or anything up there?
Yeah, zebras, yeah. Unicorns, yeah, dancing. But no bits and pieces of Noah's Ark. Yeah.
But I've also, if I remember right, you learned from you at one point that maybe what we consider to be Mount Ararat is not what's referenced in Scripture.
That's true. I mean, sometimes our problems with understanding the archaeological records stem from our problems in reading the Bible. We forget that we read the Bible with blinders on. Sometimes we read the Bible in translation and we don't have full understanding. According to the text of Genesis, it says that the ark came to rest on the mountains, plural, mountains of Ararat or Urartu, which is actually an entire range of mountains. So we don't know exactly even which peak is the true Mount Ararat.
That makes me think of something you shared earlier about when we come to the text and trying to, sometimes we just kind of impose some things on it versus learning from it. Like about Egypt, you're talking about the Exodus.
Yeah.
And how many people there were.
How many people? Yeah, how many? Numbers are a big deal and a big problem in the Bible. And it's a big problem because we don't really know what's going on, quite honestly. The word for 1,000 sounds like this, Eleph. Eleph, say it, Eleph. Eleph. Like elephant, Eleph. This is a word for 1,000. But it's also the word for a chief, or it's a word for a squad, or a word for a platoon. And so when we read in the Bible that there were 600 Elephs of fighting men that are, exodusing Egypt and going into Canaan, 600 Elephs, do we mean that there's 600,000 fighting men? Each one of them has a wife and, 2.5 kids. Suddenly we've got millions of people. Cecil B. DeMille, right? 10 Commandments, millions and millions of people. Go back and read the text. It's 600 Elephs. What if it's 600 squads? And what if there are only 5 men per squad? Yeah, what does that do? What does that do to the number? Suddenly we're talking 10,000 people instead of 1 million people. And that's not a problem of the Bible, that's not an archaeology problem. That's a translation problem. That's our problem in trying to interpret an ancient text, and we're not quite sure what word to choose. So, we have to be cautious when you hear the critics say, oh, there's no way they could, 1 million people couldn't. Come on, that's a straw man argument. You need to read the text.
So a smaller number actually, if you have millions of people heading up towards Canaan, I remember somewhere hearing recently, like 40 minutes ago, that there weren't 1 million people in the whole land of Canaan.
There weren't 1 million people in all of the land of Canaan in the time of Moses. Right?
So a couple million Israelites showing up would have just overwhelmed them, and there's really not a need for God, right?
Right. Where's
so
the
if
miracle
it's a smaller
in that?
number, bigger God.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Let me say one other thing before you run on, because I know you're going to. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul makes the argument. Paul says something, if Christ were not raised, then your faith is in vain. Right? This is just hocus pocus. We might as well go home. Right? If there was no resurrection, this is an exercise in futility, what we're doing right now, right? You could spend your time elsewhere if Christ wasn't resurrected. But Paul says, if Christ has been raised, man, that's a game changer, total game changer. And what Paul is itching, right, where he's scratching, is something that I think is really important for this discussion, and that is the historical reality of the events that are described in the Bible. There was a man named Jesus of Nazareth. He had flesh, he had fingernails, right? He had feet, just like you and me. He died, and if we accept the claim of the Gospels, he was raised to life. These are historical facts. Archaeology, and biblical archaeology in particularly, keys off of this, or tees off with the assumption that these are historical facts. I don't want to pick on anybody, but I've never seen a course in Quranic archaeology. I'm not, hear me clearly here. That Christianity is absolutely unique in saying there is a historical reality behind the faith. And that is the game changer, right, for us. And it also, incidentally, becomes, the reason for doing what we do.
That is profound. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something for us all to consider. Let's turn the corner here a little bit.
Okay.
So one of the things you do now
Yep.
is you take folks to Israel and other biblically mentioned lands. When you take people there, what are
Yeah.
some of those aha moments? I know when I was there in 2018, I had some of mine.
What was yours?
Well, this wild one, and it's very weird, but there were two things. One, standing on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and you had pointed out we don't know exactly where Jesus walked. We can't say.
It's on the surface.
The surface. Yes. Yeah. But looking out over the Sea of Galilee, I said, I don't know where Jesus stood on this shore, but I know he looked out there. And that was cool.
Yeah.
But also one of the things, when we were traveling down from Nazareth to Galilee, Jesus became very small. And by that, I meant he became very human. Usually when I think about Jesus, he looms large in our mind's eye. But he became, in that sense, he became very real, that here is Jesus doing this very earthly ministry as a real flesh and blood person. And that was something I just kind of took away. But I wonder what other people kind of learned that you've heard or picked up on.
Different people have different experiences. At this stage in my life, I've seen most things, so I'm not wowed so much by it anymore. So what I have to do to generate energy is derive my wow from their wow. So I pay close attention to those things. A lot of people are wowed at the Garden of Gethsemane. And at the Garden of Gethsemane, down in the valley of the Kidron, you look up, you see the hills on one side, the Mount of Olives Ridge. You look the other way, and you can see Jerusalem. And you can see the road that comes down. That road hasn't changed. And we know that it was down that road that the torches came, on the night that Jesus was praying and was arrested. And that's kind of an aha moment for a lot of people, or a wow moment for a lot of people. Sea of Galilee is always a winner too, in that way. And Bethlehem, gosh, Bethlehem is a cool place. We're pretty sure we know the place where Jesus was born, and that's really cool. Yeah. If you,
one thing what would you like, because you've been over a lot, you spent a lot of time over there, and interact with, one thing I was impressed with was the local folks that you interacted with. What are things you would want us to know, as just kind of average American Christians in general? What would you want them to know about these lands?
About these places? Well, I would say for travelers today who go over that part of the world, and this is true in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, all of this region was heavily Christianized and was very Christian at one point in history. Now, it's not today, but there are those Christian roots that are deep in the soil, and there remain to this day a faithful Christian population that lives there. I've taught at a place called the Palestinian Institute of Archaeology, and therefore lived in Palestine for a couple of years, and got to know a lot of the church folk that are still there today. And I'll never forget, I was sitting having dinner one time in a home, and the head of the family was sitting there, and I said something to him. I said, well, man, what do you want me to bring the next time I come? Because some of these people have nothing. What do you want me to bring? He says, I don't want you to bring anything. Kuri, he called me Kuri, which in Arabic is the word for priest, because he didn't know what is a Protestant pastor? I don't know what a Protestant pastor. Kuri, he said, what I want you to do is go home and tell people that we're here. Tell people that we're here. That's what you can do to help. And what he was suggesting is that the American church needs to realize that there is a living church, a living body of believers in that part of the world that continues to exist to this day. Palestinian Christians in particular are in the pinch. One, the Israelis don't want them because they're Arab. Two, the Arab folks don't want them because they're not Muslim. And so Palestinian Christians are really in the pinch. and suffering in all kinds of ways that we can't even imagine. So I mean, in order to honor the head of the household who asked me that question one day, I tell you all that you have brothers and sisters that are living in that part of the world today, and you need to pray for them because they are definitely in the pinch, in all kinds of ways.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I want you to all know, we had, as I mentioned, we were hoping to do an Israel trip soon, but there's a war going on right now that's impacting them, and so we're not sure when that would happen, but you are doing some other tours right now and stuff. If you'd like any information about Mark, go out at the Welcome Center. He's got a few brochures. Also in your program, you can see there his website, and you go and learn more. And whether you just go with an official group or you're just going to go on your own, want to link up, oftentimes there are extra spaces in these tours. So if that's interests you at all,
Bible Land
please.
Explorer, like and subscribe.
There you go. There's the plug. What would you like folks, if they're thinking at all about that, what would you like them to begin thinking and praying about?
Well, one of the first things I tell every group when we are on our way over to that part of the world is to adjust your mindset, because we are coming into this not as tourists, but we're coming as pilgrims. And there's a difference, right? Tourists travel to get. Pilgrims travel to give. Tourists travel to collect pictures and experiences and souvenirs. And those are all fine, all of that is good. But a pilgrim approaches it differently. We're not there to see what we can suck out, but we're there to see what we can do, how we can influence the people who are there. And the tourist is going to complain about the pillow being not as soft as he or she wished. The pilgrim is going to say to the people that are doing the housekeeping, how can I pray for you? And so I'm constantly encouraging our people to travel not as those who are passing through the land, but rather as those who let the land pass through them. Be a giver, not just a getter. Be a pilgrim and not a tourist. And that's big. You guys are experiencing that right here. Yeah.
Let's give Mark a hand, if you would.
Yeah. Thank you.
As I said, we're kind of teeing up for a series, but I really hope that this morning you've begun to see that we're talking about a real place. Ordinary place in many respects, but where some extraordinary things happen because God showed up. And I just want to invite you, even in your own life, we live in ordinary places, but God can begin to do and continue to do some extraordinary things within each of us that often may look ordinary. Jesus said if you gave a cup of cold water to one of the least of these, you were doing it in his name, that something powerful there. So don't overlook those simple, powerful things. I just want to invite you, just begin to ask yourself, God, what do you want me to take away from this morning? So will you pray with me? Father, as we give you this moment and we prepare to sing, Lord, help us to focus our eyes and our minds and our thoughts on you. That you are real and did something real in some real places. And we are learning more and more about that. So we ask, Lord, that as we build our faith on this evidence, that we would see you at work in our own lives. And whatever decision, whatever yielding needs to take place within our spirits, within our hearts, within our hands, within our minds, move among us this morning. Each one of us, something that we need to say, here's my next step. And I pray this now in Jesus' name. Amen.